Hi, today's lecture is on management of medical emergencies in dental office. This is the second part of the lecture which we had previously recorded. And in this lecture, we'll be dealing with a few topics which we have already dealt in the first part. It's not like we are repeating the topic, it's just that the treatment plan is much more definite and much more in detail in this presentation. So the learning outcomes is just the same like the previous lecture. So at the end of this topic, the student should be able to list out 5 medical emergencies that the dentist can face within the dental office, and they should be aware of the signs and symptoms of each of these medical emergencies, and they should be able to describe the management of these emergencies such as BLS, emergency medications, calling for assistance, etc. So the first medical emergency we are going to deal with, it's about acute adrenal insufficiency. We have already seen about this uh, part 1 of this lecture. So AAI, that is acute adrenal insufficiency, is a true medical emergency. So why? Because the victim is in immediate danger of death due to peripheral vascular collapse, which can lead to shock, and also ventricular asystole, which can lead to cardiac arrest. So you have to keep two things in mind. One is the rule of twos, that is adrenocortical suppression should be suspected. That is, you have to anticipate it if you have a patient who gives you a history that he has received glucocorticosteroid therapy in two of the following methods. That is, in a dose of 20 milligram or more of cortisone or its equivalent via the oral or parenteral route for a continuous period of 2 weeks or longer within 2 years of the dental therapy. If the patient satisfies at least two of this criteria, then you can always anticipate adrenal crisis during your procedure. And the factors influencing the return of adrenocortical function after exogenous glucocorticosteroid therapy, it is the dose of the glucocorticosteroid that has been administered, the duration of the course, and the frequency of administration, and the time of administration, and the route of administration. These are the factors which can influence the return of the adrenocortical function. Because, for example, a patient who has been receiving steroids parenterally or he has been taking orally for a longer duration, that is like what is mentioned in the rule of two, that is for 2 weeks or longer, definitely the adrenal gland would have gone in for a suppression. So what is the suggested management of a patient with a history of systemic corticosteroid therapy? So how are you going to manage a patient who is coming to your clinic with a history of steroid therapy? The management varies according to the kind of procedure you're going to do. If it is a procedure involving conservative dentistry like a root canal treatment or a single extraction under LA. So if your patient has been taken steroids during the previous 12 months, you can give the same oral steroid dose. For example, he has been taking 10 mg prednisolone per day for say 2 weeks or so. So you can give the same 10 mg prednisolone orally in the morning, that is before the procedure, or you can give hydrocortisone succinate intravenously 25 to 50 milligram preoperatively. If the patient is taking steroid currently, that he is already on steroid therapy and he has come in for a procedure, then you have to double the oral steroid dose that he is taking. Before the procedure in the morning, ask the patient to take double the steroid dose, or you can give hydrocortisone 25 to 50 milligram intravenously preoperatively, followed by the same normal steroid medication postoperatively. So if you are going to do multiple extraction, or if the patient is going to undergo a surgery under general anesthesia, how are we going to manage? If the patient gives you a history that he has taken steroids in the last 12 months, you have to give the usual oral steroid dose in the morning plus, okay, remember, previously it was either the oral steroid dose or Now it is plus. Along with the oral steroid dose, you give hydrocortisone succinate intravenously preoperatively 25 to 50 milligram and intramuscularly 6 hourly for 24 hours postoperatively. And if the patient is under steroid therapy, you have to double the oral steroid dose in the morning plus give hydrocortisone succinate 25 to 50 milligram intravenously preoperatively and continue the intramuscular dosage 6th hourly for 24 hours. After 24 hours, the patient can go in for his normal steroid medication. What are the clinical features of acute adrenal insufficiency? The most prominent and the most dreaded clinical feature which can prove fatal is hypotension, which can lead to shock, decreased perfusion to the vital organs, and there will be depression of the myocardial contractility, hypoglycemia. Patient will complain of abdominal pain, nausea and vomiting, and there will be mental confusion. So the management part, just the same like any other medical emergency. You terminate the dental treatment, position the patient comfortably if asymptomatic, supine with feet elevated slightly if symptomatic, and provide BLS as needed after checking for the ABC. And when it comes to the definite care, you have to administer glucocorticosteroid if available and if the history of adrenal sufficiency exists. And if the patient is unconscious, then you position the patient supine with the feet elevated slightly and provide BLS as required, chest compressions, rescue breaths, etc. And if the patient is exhibiting ventricular asystole, then you have to go for BLS, no other option. If there is a ventricular fibrillation, then you can go for an automated external defibrillator, along with provide glucocorticosteroid as needed, as you establish an intravenous access, and you have to administer hydrocortisone succinate 25 to 50 milligram intravenously. So now we come to the next medical emergency, which is anaphylaxis. If you remember your pathology from second year, anaphylaxis is a type 1 hypersensitivity reaction, and it is type 1 and it is something which can happen very fast. That is, the duration is just from seconds to minutes. The patient can develop this shock and he can collapse. So it is an antigen induced antibody mediated hypersensitivity reaction, and the antibody involved is the immunoglobulin E. So in dental practice, we come across a lot of antibiotics, so penicillin, cephalosporin, tetracycline, sulfonamide, and all these antibiotics are capable of inducing an anaphylactic reaction, but it doesn't happen in all individuals, only those individuals who are susceptible to it. So genetically, they will be predisposed. And so you have a range of drugs and substances which can induce an anaphylactic reaction. You have antibiotics, analgesics like aspirin and NSAIDs, opioids, anti-anxiety drugs, even local anesthetics, and other agents like acrylic monomer. So any of these substances, any of these drugs can cause an anaphylactic reaction. What are the signs and symptoms? How will you identify that the patient is going in for an anaphylactic shock? The diagnosis is done based upon the following signs and symptoms. The first and foremost is the patient will develop certain cutaneous manifestations on the skin. First, of course, the patient will develop facial flushing. There will be itching or pruritus, paresthesia, edema or urticaria, that is development of rashes and wheal formation, or peripheral cold clammy skin. These are all classic signs of an allergic reaction, and patient will have constriction of his airway. The bronchioles will constrict, so that leads to stridor or wheeze, that is a whistling sound. If the whistling sound is noticed when the patient is inspiring, that is taking in the breath, that you hear the whistling sound, it is called as the stridor. And if the the whistling sound is seen during expiration, it is called as a wheeze. And patient will also have abdominal pain, nausea, Extreme cases, the patient will go in for a loss of consciousness, and he can also go into cyanosis. The another classic feature of shock, rapid, weak, or impalpable pulse, and hypotension, that is decrease in the blood pressure. So the patient has developed all these signs and symptoms. You have noticed it. He's developed rashes. He's struggling to breathe. And when you check the vitals, you find the blood pressure is falling down. So what are you supposed to do now? First and foremost is secure the airway. So how do we achieve that? If you are trained enough, you can intubate. If there is a respiratory obstruction, you can intubate the patient, use an endotracheal tube and intubate the patient, administer 100% oxygen. It should be high flow, that is 15 liters per minute. And the positioning of the patient, you need to position the patient according to the emergency. Like if the patient is going to have wheeze, then you cannot put him in a supine position. You need to keep him in an upright position. And the miracle drug, adrenaline, it has to be administered immediately. The dosage is 0.5 mg, that is 0.5 ml of, remember the concentration, 1 is to 1000. Okay, this is very important. 1 is to 1000, that is the concentration of the adrenaline you administer during anaphylactic shock. And it is administered intramuscularly. If you want to give it intravenously, it is 1 is to 10,000. Okay, if you are having 1 is to 1000, you have to administer it intramuscularly or subcutaneously. And the duration of adrenaline is just 5 minutes. So within that 5 minutes, you should check the vital, see if there is any improvement. If there is no improvement in the vital signs, if the blood pressure is not coming up, then you have to give another shot. So you have to repeat the dosage every 5 minutes. And secure intravenous access, and you have to administer chlorpheniramine or the hydrocortisone, which is one is an antihistamine which will take care of all those cutaneous manifestations like rashes. And you have to administer hydrocortisone 200 milligram intravenously, which will take care of the blood pressure and other things. And intravenous fluids, that is 0.9% saline, 500 ml up to 2 liters you can administer, and you need to titrate it against the BP. If the blood pressure shows improvement, then you can reduce the administration of the intravenous fluid. If the patient is unresponsive with no pulse, adrenaline can be given intravenously. And now when you are giving it intravenously, the concentration is 1 is to 10,000. Okay, that is the concentration of adrenaline that can be administered intravenously. And stop administration of intravenous means administration of adrenaline when you detect a positive response in the patient. This slide shows the algorithm for management of anaphylaxis. I have included, there's nothing, I have included this because it gives you everything in detail, and you also have the management of anaphylactic shock if it happens in kids, children. Okay, that is the last part, you can see it in the picture. So just make a note of it. Next we come to angina pectoris, which is nothing but chest pain. So acute severe chest pain usually caused by angina or less commonly by myocardial infarction. Okay, chest pain need not be myocardial infarction, so it can be just a plain angina. So patients with unstable angina and those with a recent history of hospital admission for ischemic chest pain have the highest risk. So if the patient gives a history of unstable angina, that it is that he experiences chest pain periodically and he has also been admitted in the hospital for the same complaint, that should ring a bell. These are the patients who are very much prone for having an anginal attack during the dental treatment, and they should not be considered for routine dental treatment in primary care. Always it's better that you deal you always get a physician's consent, a cardiologist consent before you do any kind of procedures in this patient. So what are the diagnostic features? That is a classic description of anginal pain. Severe crushing retrosternal pain radiating down the left arm, and the patient will also have breathlessness, but sometimes even a simple heartburn due to high acidity, that can mimic an anginal pain, so you should be able to rule it out. And patient will develop vomiting and loss of consciousness if there is an infarct. That is, if it is a myocardial infarction, patient will have vomiting and loss of consciousness. And again, in myocardial infarction, the pulse may be weak or irregular. So these are the three types of angina. You have stable angina, variant angina, and unstable angina. So what are the considerations when it comes to dental treatment? So as I said earlier, the history. So you have to record the frequency of the anginal attack, the patient's abilities, and based upon that you can classify them according to the ASA classification, and then the dental consideration. What are the things that you need to do if the patient is coming in for a dental treatment? First, if the patient has at least one attack per month, one anginal attack, one episode of anginal attack per month, and if the patient can walk two blocks normally and he can climb the staircase without any breathlessness or any pain, then they come under ASA 2. And here you just need to supplement oxygen. Make sure you have a proper working oxygen cylinder in your clinic and supplement oxygen. That's it. If the patient gives you a history of anginal attacks at least twice or four times per month, and the patient is able to walk without any problem and he's able to climb staircase, then again this class they get classified under ASA 2. And in these kind of patients, always it's better you give them a pre-medication with nitroglycerin 5 minutes before therapy along with supplemental oxygen. And if the patient has 2 to 3 attacks in a week and the patient is developing pain even while walking or when he is climbing upstairs, then they come under ASA 3. So you have to give pre-medication with nitroglycerin 5 minutes before the therapy and supplemental oxygen. And if the patient has a daily episode or increased frequency and duration of the severity, radiation to new site precipitated by less activity, so these patients, they are quite moribund. So a patient is unable to walk and they are not able to climb up also. So in those cases, they come under ASA 4, and usually ASA 4 means better don't touch the patient. Okay, it's better only emergency procedures, no elective dental procedures for these patients. So what will you do if you come across a patient or if you have a patient who is experiencing an anginal attack? First and foremost, terminate the procedure, position the patient comfortably, and then ABC, airway, breathing and circulation, and then you go for the definitive care. If the patient already has a history of angina, so you administer nitroglycerin sublingually, administer oxygen, and pain resolves, you shift the patient to the hospital, and later in future you have to modify your treatment. If the patient has no history of angina, ask someone emergency or medical assistant, administer oxygen, give nitroglycerin, monitor the vital signs, shift the patient to the hospital for further management. And if there is no response or if pain resolves and returns, better you call the emergency medical assistant. Have to administer fibrinolytic agents and monitor vital signs. All this can be done only in the hospital. So if the patient is not showing any response, is just unconscious, and but they say the pain is it's resolves and again it is returning another episode within a span of few minutes, better shift the patient immediately to the hospital. Now we come to another emergency, which is the bronchial asthma. So anxiety, infection or exposure to an allergen or drugs, they can precipitate an asthmatic attack. So you have high risk asthmatics. How do you know that an individual is a high risk asthmatic? Patients who take oral medication in addition to inhaled beta-2 agonists and corticosteroids, patient who regularly use a nebulizer at home, if the patient says that he uses regularly nebulizer, and patients who have required oral steroids for their asthma within the last year, and patients who have been admitted to hospital with asthma within the last year. So if your patient falls into one of these groups, these four groups, then he is an high risk asthmatic. So what are the diagnostic features? First is of course breathlessness. The patient will be having dyspnea and expiratory wheeze, whistling sound when he is trying to breathe out, and he will be using his accessory muscles, like he will be lifting up his shoulders, he will be shrugging shoulders with each respiratory cycle with increased severity, and the pulse will be rapid. It will be usually over 110 beats per minute with increasing severity, but this may slow in life-threatening exacerbation. So the same thing, audible wheeze, the patient won't be able to speak, the respiratory rate will be more than 25, they'll be using the accessory muscles, the patient will be exhausted, the pulse will be either less than 50 or more than 110, and less than 50 means usually it is high, but as the asthmatic attack gets much severe, the pulse rate will go down, and the patient will also go in for cyanosis. So if it is a mild asthmatic attack, all you need to do is give oxygen, and always you should have a salbutamol inhaler in your emergency trolley. You just need to give two activations, observe for 45 minutes, reassessment, and make sure you ask a follow up by a general practitioner. If it is a severe or life threatening asthmatic attack, observe the patient and ABCDE regularly, that is airway, breathing, circulation, etc. Provide oxygen. As usual, it should be around 15 liters per minute, high flow. Salbutamol inhaler via spacer, up to 10 activations. This is for severe or life-threatening asthma. Now we come to seizures. Seizures or fits are usually seen in non-epileptics. Most of the time, the patient will say that he is an epileptic, whether he is under treatment or not. The patient will be aware of it. So various factors may precipitate a epileptic seizure, that is a fit. For example, if the patient doesn't eat and he comes to you with an empty stomach, it is one of the precipitating factors. And normally they are supposed to take the anti-epileptic drug every day. Some patients, they become overconfident, they try to stop the therapy without the consultation of the neurologist or the physician, and they just cease to take the anticonvulsant therapy. They just stop taking the drugs, and which is another precipitating factor. And females, especially at the time of menstruation, and patients who take some drugs, and patients who take alcohol, flumazenil or tricyclic antidepressants, all these individuals are very much prone for epileptic seizures. And fits may also affect epileptic seizures, may also be seen in patients with no history of epilepsy, especially following hypoxia from loss of consciousness, uh, or other reasons, or in hypoglycemia. So how do you diagnose a tonic clonic or a grand mal seizure? Must have seen so loss of consciousness with a rigid extended body which is sometimes preceded by a brief cry, widespread jerking movements, possible incontinence of urine and or feces, slow recovery with the patient sometimes remaining dazed, that is called as the post-ictal phase. Normally, before a seizure attack commences, the patient will experience an uneasy feeling. That is something which is called as aura, A-U-R-A. So, most of those epileptic patients, they will know that they are going to have a seizure attack, because when they experience that aura, they are aware that they are going to have a seizure attack. So, I have come across patients who had seizures during the procedure, and there have been precipitating factors, and the patient themselves will tell me to stop the procedure because they have that feeling, that aura, that they are going to have a seizure. So how do you manage status epilepticus? Airway maintenance, recovery position, remove dentures, insert oral or nasal airway, intubate if necessary. Okay, these are all for status epilepticus. Oxygen should be given 100%, suction as necessary. Intravenous access, because you need to collect blood, you have to check serum urea, electrolytes, liver function test, fasting blood glucose, calcium ion, etc. And if the patient is having hypotension, you need to correct it with fluids. Thiamine can be given intravenously 250 milligram if alcoholism or malnourishment is suspected, and glucose also can be administered 50% intravenously if hypoglycemia is suspected. What are the drugs to stop seizure? Slow IV bolus phase, that is, when a patient is having a seizure attack, if you are able to establish an intravenous line, you give lorazepam 2 to 4 milligram intravenously for over 30 seconds in a large vein, and the second dose is given if there is no response within 10 minutes. Or you can give diazepam 10 milligram intravenously. You can also give midazolam 10 mg. There is or you can give intravenous infusions, that is phenytoin can be given as an intravenous infusion 80 milligram per kg at a rate of 15 milligram per minute, and you need to monitor the ECG and blood pressure. Diazepam also can be administered as an infusion, that is 100 milligram of diazepam in 500 milliliter of dextrose normal saline, that is 1 pint, at 40 milliliter per hour. And there is another severe or acute case where you have to go general anesthesia phase, and paralysis and ventilation with continuous EEG, electroencephalogram monitoring. This is for an acute case where we are unable to control the seizures. That's when we go in for this general anesthesia phase. Otherwise, most of the time the seizure subside by itself. In extreme cases where the seizure is not subsiding, you have to shift the patient to a hospital, preferably a ICU, and either they will go for this IV infusion phase or a slow IV bolus phase and make the patient go to sleep. That is the management for seizures. So now we come to a condition called as hyperventilation. Okay, this is something which happens very commonly and can be easily managed, but the signs and symptoms exhibited during hyperventilation can really alarm you. You might think that the patient is having a myocardial infarction or the patient is having a seizure or something else, but basically it is ventilation in excess of that required to maintain normal blood partial pressure of oxygen, that is arterial oxygen tension, and normal arterial carbon dioxide tension. So the patient is anxious. Most of the time anxiety, acute anxiety is the common predisposing factor, and because of this anxiety the patient starts breathing rapidly. So the ventilation is in excess. So that is called as hyperventilation. So the normal partial pressure of oxygen and normal partial pressure of carbon dioxide is jeopardized in the blood. So what are the signs and symptoms? Patient will have palpitations, tachycardia, dizziness, numbness and tingling of extremities, precordial pain, disturbance of vision, tremor, stiffness, carpopedal tetany, etc. So you can see all these signs and symptoms if the patient is developing, is having high blood pressure, high heart rate, palpitations, and he's developed carpopedal tetany, that is the spasm of the fingers, and they can develop tremor, stiffness, looks more like a myocardial infarction, or patient is having a seizure attack. So what is the pathophysiology? So basically it's due to anxiety. Anxiety which leads to respiratory alkalosis followed by hypocapnia. So when there is respiratory alkalosis, the carbon dioxide concentration in the blood will go down. So that leads to hypocapnia. So increase in the blood catecholamine level, then decrease in the level of the ionized calcium level. So the decreased ionized calcium level, that is less than 9 to 11 milligram per deciliter, that is the reason for the carpopedal spasm, that is tetany. And the increased catecholamines leads to palpitations, tachycardia, etc. So how do you manage this termination of the dental procedure? Positioning of the patient, airway, breathing and circulation has to be monitored. Calming and reassuring the patient. Make sure that you reassure the patient, make the patient relax. Tell the patient, make the patient relax and make sure the patient's anxiety level is brought down. And increase the, now we all know that there's due to decreased partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood. So you need to increase it. So increase the carbon dioxide pressure in the blood by making the patient rebreathe exhaled air. So how do you achieve this? You ask the patient to breathe into a cupped hands, okay, cupped hand or a face mask. So what happens is the patient is inhaling the oxygen, exhaling the carbon dioxide. At one point, the amount of oxygen within the cupped hands or the face mask or a plastic bag is depleted. It's gone down. And now it is just carbon dioxide inside the air, and the patient is inhaling and exhaling the same carbon dioxide, and that will increase the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood, and the patient will revive. Drug management not required if necessary. And now we come to hypoglycemia. This we have already dealt with it. One of the most dangerous complication of diabetes mellitus, because the brain becomes starved of glucose. So this is very commonly seen in diabetic patients treated with insulin, and those with poor blood glucose control or poor awareness of their hypoglycemic episodes. So So again, the signs and symptoms are deepening drowsiness, disorientation, excitability or aggressiveness, sweating, tremors, convulsions, impaired consciousness, coma. So basically, it's like in a progressive rate. So initially, the patient will feel drowsy, there'll be disorientation, some will be aggressive, and then they develop sweating, tremors, convulsions, finally impaired consciousness and go into coma. So the management part, always check the random blood glucose level before the procedure. Okay, if it is less than 3 millimole, better ask the patient to eat something and then you do the procedure. If it is a conscious patient and he is having a hypoglycemic attack, you can just make the patient drink some glucose drink or some carbohydrates, bread, biscuit, or just ask him to have a bottle of a can of Pepsi or Coke, something which contains sugar. And if the patient is unconscious, then you have to give 50% dextrose IV intravenously. Transmucosal sugar is also available, but intravenous administration is better. And glucagon can also be given intramuscularly or intravenously, 1 mg glucagon. Monitor the vital signs every 5 minutes and administer oxygen. Okay, that brings us to the end of this lecture. Uh, if there is any doubts or questions, please post them on the e-portal. I'll be more than happy to answer them. Okay, then thank you.